Okay, we're looking at the tandem pillow block bearings coming off of the shaft that's mounted in the crank. I'm going to turn it on at a walk. Now, I don't believe there's any noticeable out of alignment that you can see on this camera, but that crank that sound is actually coming from the crank moving on the shaft coming out of the gearbox. And I haven't checked it yet this morning. I'll stop the camera here shortly and check it, make sure that that's not moving or has not loosened up since the last time I tightened it up on the shaft coming out of the gearbox. But it moves with enough force that even though the set screws on the pillow block bearing in a race are both set against that shaft coming out of the crank, it moves those bearings as it works its way off of the shaft coming out of the gearbox. Now, I don't know whether you can see that thing passing by the sensor. I don't know what you call that, coming off of that that's mounted to the crank that passes by that sensor on the left. But you can see that shiny mark. It moves out far enough to begin to interfere with that sensor. So I'll turn it off and see if anything moves. Okay, the crank has not worked loose on that shaft for several hours of lessons. But hopefully you can hear that croaking frog sound. And we started having problems with this crank as a result, I believe, of the original noise that was heard, and they had ordered a new gearbox thinking it was something in the gearbox. It was not the gearbox, it was the shaft between the drive motor and the gearbox. When this thing kicks into the higher ranges and it rocks back and forth on that motor, that shaft, the key was wobbled, worn real badly, the key on the shaft out of the motor into the gearbox. And we took it apart there and found that, and when we put a new key in, I enlarged that key slightly just by pressing it, and it fit in the slot, and that prevented that noise between the drive motor and the gearbox. But when that was first taken apart, I will show you the old crank, and hopefully you can see how damaged that crank was in the process of them taking it off and putting it back on not knowing that there was a set screw involved. And it got pretty badly beat up. Then the shaft broke loose, and that has been re-welded twice. The second time it was welded, I had them grind it down to a good V in there and fill it with weld, a deep weld when they put it back together. But other problems developed, and it broke the housing of the inner pillow block bearing on the shaft coming out of the crank. And so that's when we ordered this new crank, and we now have this croaking frog sound that developed shortly after the new crank was put on. Now the mounting block or the mounting bolts for the gearbox have been loosened twice and reset, trying to get the alignment. Now the one thing I have noticed about where in the about 1.5 by 3 inch channel that the pillow block bearings are mounted to, it is due to the pressure of bolting them on there. It is deforming that channel a little bit. I personally would recommend using a heavier channel, in particular in that location, or filling that channel with a block of steel with the holes bored in it for the bolts that mount the pillow block bearings, so there'd be less distortion. Now I understand that that's why you use the pillow block bearings in these areas, because they will self-align. But I don't know whether we just need to replace the crank. I do not particularly want to go back to this old crank. I really don't have any way to determine whether that, the crank coming off of that heavy housing there is in direct parallel, or would be in direct parallel to the shaft coming out of that gearbox. I may take it to a machine shop somewhere and see if they can figure out that alignment or not. But I don't see any movement. It's not enough movement to see. You can only hear it.
That's right. Try to use your leg.